The great city of Tarsan once stood as a jewel of the stars. Its towers reached into the skies, and its banners told of pride and strength. But on this day, smoke rose from broken spires, and its people stood in silence. The war was over. The conquerors had won. At the heart of the ruined square, soldiers of the enemy led their captive forward. She was the princess of Tarsan, once the symbol of her people's hope. Her golden robes were torn, her crown taken away. The chains on her wrists were heavy, clinking with each step as the soldiers dragged her to the platform. Crowds gathered around. Some were citizens forced to watch. Others were soldiers who cheered the humiliation. The conquerors wanted to break her spirit, not in secret, but before all. They wanted every eye to see that their strongest leader was now helpless. The princess walked with her head lowered. Her strength was almost gone, her breath shallow. She had fought until she could fight no longer. She had spoken words of courage to her people, but even courage could not stop the fall of an empire. Now she felt hollow, like an empty shell of what she once had been. Among the crowd was a human soldier named Captain Elias Ward. He had not come to cheer, nor to join in the cruelty. He had been stationed here as part of the peacekeeping forces, a witness to the ceremony of surrender. His orders were simple: watch, report, and do nothing. Humans had sworn neutrality in this conflict, but as Elias watched the princess stumble on the steps, something stirred inside him. Her people were different from his own, her world far from Earth, yet in her eyes he saw something familiar. Pain, loss, and dignity crushed beneath the weight of war. The soldiers forced her to kneel at the center of the platform. One pushed her down with the butt of his spear, and the crowd laughed. The sound echoed in Elias's ears like a bitter wind. The conquerors shouted that no one could stand against their power, that even the royal line had been broken. The princess tried to rise, but her legs gave way. She fell forward, her hands chained, her body too weak to hold itself up. The soldiers jeered at her collapse. One raised his weapon as if to strike her for amusement. Elias's heart tightened. He could not look away. Something deep within him refused to let this scene continue. His orders told him to stay still, to remain only an observer. But his conscience shouted louder. He stepped forward. The crowd noticed him as he pushed through. Murmurs spread. Why was a human moving toward the stage? The soldiers guarding the princess turned with narrowed eyes, warning him to stop, but Elias did not stop. His boots struck the stone steps as he climbed toward the fallen princess. She lifted her head slightly, her eyes hazy with exhaustion. Through the blur, she saw a figure standing between her and the soldiers. For the first time since her capture, someone had chosen to move toward her, not away. "Step aside, human," one of the guards growled. "This is not your place." Elias ignored the words. He bent down, his arms strong and steady, and lifted the princess into them as if she weighed. Nothing at all. Her chains clinked, but his grip was gentle. Gasps filled the air. The crowd had expected silence, not defiance. A lone human carrying the princess was a sight that no one had imagined. "Put her down!" another soldier barked, pointing his weapon at him. Elias looked up, his voice firm. "You've made your point. The world has seen your power. But she will not be left to die like this." The soldiers laughed at his defiance. "And what will you do, human? Stand against us alone?" Elias said nothing. His actions were his answer. He turned, holding the princess close, and began walking down the steps. The crowd fell silent. They watched as one man carried the broken princess away from the center of humiliation. Whispers spread among the citizens. A spark flickered where only despair had been. The soldiers moved to block him. Elias tightened his hold on her and stood tall. He was only one, but there was a weight in his stance that made even seasoned warriors hesitate. The princess felt warmth against her cheek, warmth she thought she would never know again. Her eyes closed, and for the first time since her capture, her heart beat with something beyond sorrow. The conquerors shouted, their voices growing louder. Elias had reached the edge of the square, but soldiers were moving to surround him. He could not fight them all, yet he did not stop walking. His resolve was a shield stronger than steel. Behind him, the people of Tarsan whispered to one another. They had seen cruelty every day since their defeat, but this moment was different. A stranger, a human from another world, had stepped forward, when all others remained still. At the edge of the square, Elias looked up at the walls of the fortress. His path was blocked, soldiers closing in. Yet he did not set the princess down. The princess opened her eyes weakly, her voice barely above. A whisper. Why do you help me? Elias looked down at her, his gaze steady. Because no one deserves to be broken before all. Not you. Not anyone. Her lips trembled, but she could not speak more. Her body was frail, her spirit nearly gone. But in his words there was something she had not felt in a long time. Hope. The crowd's whispers grew into murmurs. The conquerors had wanted to show despair, but instead they had revealed something else. The defiance of one human who refused to let the last light of a fallen crown be extinguished. And as soldiers closed around them, the tension in the square grew heavy. The world held its breath. Would Elias be crushed for his defiance, or would his single act of courage change everything? The answer was yet to come. The square of Tarsan had gone silent. The crowd, once filled with jeers and cruel laughter, now stared in shock. A lone human held the broken princess in his arms and refused to bow. Captain Elias Ward stood firm, his boots pressed against the stone, his eyes fixed on the soldiers who blocked his path. His arms cradled the princess carefully, as if protecting the last fragile flame of a dying fire. The enemy soldiers raised their weapons. Their armor glistened under the pale light, sharp edges catching the sun. One of them stepped forward, a commander with a scar across his face. His voice was sharp like a blade. You dare interrupt our victory, human? Step aside. She belongs to us. Elias shook his head slowly. She belongs to no one. The words struck the crowd like thunder. Murmurs spread among the citizens who stood in the shadows of the square. Some covered their mouths, afraid to speak aloud, but others let their whispers grow louder. The commander narrowed his eyes. You are a foreigner here. Your people swore neutrality. If you lift your hand against us, you betray that oath. Do you wish to start a war? Elias adjusted his hold on the princess, keeping her head against his shoulder. His voice was calm, steady. I don't want war, I want humanity. I will not stand by and watch cruelty dressed as strength. The soldiers around him shifted uneasily. Their training told them a single man was nothing, but something in his tone, in the way he stood without fear, made them hesitate. The princess stirred weakly in his arms. Her voice was faint, almost lost. Why do you risk this? Elias looked down at her. His expression softened. Because you're still alive. And as long as you live, your story isn't finished. Her eyes filled with tears that refused to fall. She had been paraded as a trophy, crushed before her people. Yet here was someone who saw her not as a symbol of defeat, but as a life worth saving. The commander barked a sharp order. Take him down! 4 soldiers rushed forward, spears lowered, boots striking against the stone. They closed in from both sides. The crowd gasped as Elias slowly set the princess on her feet against a broken pillar, whispering, Stay behind me. Though her legs trembled, she obeyed, leaning against the pillar while Elias stepped into the open. His fists tightened. He carried no blade, no gun, only the strength of his body and the fire of his will. The first soldier lunged. Elias moved fast, sidestepping and striking with his elbow. The soldier fell with a grunt, his weapon clattering to the ground. The second swung a heavy blade, but Elias caught the arm, twisted, and forced him down with a sharp kick. The crowd erupted with shouts. No one had expected this. A human, unarmed, facing trained warriors, and holding his ground. The last two soldiers came together. One slashed, the other thrust his spear. Elias ducked low, grabbed the shaft of the spear, and yanked it forward. The soldier stumbled, crashing into his partner. With one swift motion, Elias drove his shoulder into both of them, sending them sprawling. The square echoed with the sound of bodies hitting stone. For a moment, silence followed. The commander stared in disbelief. The citizens began to murmur, again. The human fights. He fights for her. He stood when no one else dared. Maybe we are not as powerless as we thought, the commander growled, anger burning in his eyes. Enough! He pointed his blade at Elias. Do you think one act of defiance will save her? We will crush you both. Elias stood tall, his chest rising and falling with steady breaths. He lifted the spear he had taken from the fallen soldier and held it firm. Then try. The princess, still leaning against the pillar, felt her heart beating faster. She had seen warriors fight before. She had seen battles lost and battles won. But this was different. This was not a fight for conquest or crown. This was one man refusing to surrender his conscience. The commander advanced, his blade shining. Elias tightened his grip. The tension was sharp, like the air before a storm. The crowd leaned forward, holding their breath. Before the clash could begin, a horn sounded from the fortress wall, a signal. The commander froze, his eyes darting upward. Reinforcements poured into the square, more soldiers, more weapons, a wave of steel and armor. Elias's jaw tightened. He could fight, but he could not fight them all. He glanced at the princess. She was weak, but her eyes held a flicker of light again. He rushed back to her, pulling her close. "We have to move!" The commander shouted orders, but Elias was already running, carrying her once more. He leaped down the steps of the square, the crowd parting in shock. Some of the citizens reached out, shielding his path, slowing the soldiers' advance. Their silence was gone. Now there were cries, voices rising in defiance. "Go!" one man shouted. "Protect her!" a woman cried. Elias carried the princess through the narrow streets of the ruined city. His boots struck the ground hard, his breath steady despite the weight in his arms. Behind them, shouts and footsteps thundered. The princess clutched his uniform weakly. "You'll be killed for this." "Not if I keep moving," Elias replied, determination burning in his eyes. They turned corners, past shattered homes and broken walls, until they reached the old stone arches near the edge of the city. The fortress walls loomed above them. Soldiers poured from gates and rooftops, blocking every exit. Elias slowed, scanning their surroundings. They were trapped. The princess's heart sank. "You should leave me. Save yourself." Elias looked at her sharply. "No, I will never leave you." His words struck her deeper than any weapon. For so long, she had been alone in her suffering. Now, here was a man who refused to abandon her, even when death closed in. The soldiers closed the circle, weapons ready. The commander's voice boomed across the stones. "This is your last chance, human. Put her down and surrender. Spare yourself." Elias stood tall, the princess in his arms once more. His voice carried clear and strong. "I would rather fall standing than live kneeling." The crowd that had followed gasped, some even cheering softly through their fear. The spark was growing, but the circle of soldiers tightened. Elias's grip on the spear hardened, his heart pounded, yet his eyes were calm. He knew he could not win against them all, but he also knew he would not let her die alone. The princess, trembling, whispered, "Why fight for me so fiercely?" Elias met her gaze. "Because hope needs someone to carry it, and right now, that someone is you." Soldiers raised their weapons. The world seemed to pause, holding its breath once more. And then, as the first soldier lunged, Elias turned sharply toward a shadowed archway he had noticed earlier. Without hesitation, he charged into the narrow passage, carrying the princess. With him, the soldiers' shouts echoed behind them. The chase had begun. The narrow passage swallowed them as Elias ran, his breath steady though the weight in his arms was heavy. The princess clung weakly to his chest, her head resting against his shoulder. Behind them, the echo of boots and shouted orders grew louder. The conquerors would not let their prize slip away so easily. The tunnel was dark, lit only by cracks in the ceiling where thin beams of light poured through. Dust swirled with every step. The air was damp, carrying the smell of stone and earth. Elias slowed just enough to steady his footing, his eyes sharp, his mind racing. The princess whispered faintly, "This path, it leads to the old tunnels. My ancestors built them long ago, beneath the city. Few remember now." Elias glanced at her. "Do you know the way?" She closed her eyes, trying to recall faded memories of stories told in her childhood. "Yes, but only some. We must keep to the left passages, the right ones. They collapse." Elias nodded. "Then we'll trust your memory." Behind them, the shouts grew closer. The enemy was entering the tunnels. The sound of boots on stone carried through the walls, echoing like a drum of pursuit. Elias pushed forward. His boots splashed in shallow puddles. The tunnel branched into two paths. One left, one right. Without hesitation, he turned left, trusting the princess's words. The air grew colder, the walls rougher. The princess lifted her head slightly, her eyes searching the walls. Strange markings worn by time lined the stone. These are the signs. The builders carved them. We are on the right path." Elias gave a short nod and kept moving. His muscles burned, but he ignored the pain. His grip around her never loosened. She was fragile, but to him she felt as important as carrying the last light of a world. A sharp clatter echoed behind them. Metal, striking stone. The soldiers were close now. A voice shouted, "Don't let them escape!" The princess shivered. "They will not stop. They fear what I still represent." Elias adjusted her in his arms, his voice steady. "Then let them fear. It means you're not finished yet." The tunnel sloped downward. The ground grew slippery. Elias moved carefully, his eyes scanning every shadow. At times, faint beams of light revealed broken doorways leading into forgotten chambers. Once, they passed a hall filled with broken statues, faces of her ancestors crumbled by time. The princess looked at them with sorrow. "Once these halls were sacred, now they are ruins." Elias's voice was firm. "Ruins can rise again. You're proof of that." Her eyes met his, and for the first time, she held his gaze without lowering her head. In his eyes, she saw no pity, only determination. It made her chest ache, not with despair, but with something she thought was lost. Belief. The sound of footsteps returned, closer this time. Torches flickered at the far end of the tunnel, casting shadows against the walls. The soldiers were gaining. Elias quickened his pace, turning down another passage. The tunnel narrowed until he had to angle his shoulders to pass. The princess clutched at his uniform, whispering, "There is a way out, if I remember right. A shaft that leads to the outer wilds." "Then we find it," Elias replied. The tunnel opened suddenly into a wider cavern. Water dripped from the ceiling into a pool at its center. On the far wall, a stone staircase wound upward into the dark. That way, the princess said, pointing weakly. Elias hurried across the cavern. Behind them, soldiers burst into the chamber. Their torches lit the cavern like fireflies in the dark. Weapons clattered as they gave chase. Elias set the princess gently on the first step. "Climb if you can. I'll hold them off." She shook her head quickly, fear in her eyes. "No, you'll be killed. You cannot face them all." Elias smiled, faintly, gripping the spear he had carried since the square. "Then we'll climb together." Without waiting, he lifted her again and began ascending the stairs. His boots pounded the stone, each step a battle against gravity. Below, soldiers rushed into the cavern, their torches flaring. "Faster!" Elias urged himself. His breath grew heavy, but he never slowed. The staircase twisted upward, circling the cavern wall. Halfway up, arrows clattered against the stone near his feet. The soldiers had begun firing from below. The princess cried out softly, but Elias shielded her with his body, pressing forward. At last, the staircase ended at a shaft of stone. Faint daylight glowed at the top. Roots hung down like long fingers. Elias reached the final steps and set the princess against the wall. "We're close," he said. The shaft was narrow, but climbable. He tested the roots and stones. They held firm. He turned back to the princess. "I'll go first, then pull you up." She shook her head. "No, you must carry me. My strength will not last." Elias hesitated. The shaft was steep. Climbing with her in his arms would be dangerous. But when he looked into her eyes, he knew he could not leave her behind. He pulled her close, adjusted his grip, and began the climb. His muscles screamed, his fingers dug into stone, but he moved upward slowly, carefully. The princess pressed her face into his chest, whispering prayers in her native tongue. Below, soldiers swarmed into the chamber. They raised their weapons, shouting, but their arrows could not reach so high. Still, time was short. Elias climbed with all his strength. Each pull of his arms, each push of his legs carried them higher. His back ached. His breath tore through his chest, but he did not stop. Finally, his hand broke through into sunlight. With a final heave, he pulled himself and the princess out of the shaft, collapsing onto soft grass. The princess blinked at the sudden light. Before them stretched the wild lands beyond the city, rolling hills, broken ruins, and forests untouched by war. Elias lay on the grass, his chest heaving, the princess still in his arms. For a moment, neither spoke. The air was clean, the sky vast. Freedom, even if only for now. The princess turned her head to look at him. Her voice trembled, not from weakness, but from something else. "Why do you not give up? Any other would have left me behind." Elias sat up slowly, brushing dirt from his hands. His gaze was steady, calm. "Because leaving you would mean leaving hope behind. And I won't do that." The princess's eyes filled with quiet light. She had been broken, humiliated, stripped of her crown. Yet in this moment, with the human who refused to let her die, she felt something stir inside her chest, something that had been silent for too long. Hope. Elias rose, helping her to her feet. "We're not safe yet, but we're free, for now. That's enough to keep moving." The princess looked at the horizon, her chains still heavy on her wrists, but her heart lighter than before. For the first time since the fall of her city, she whispered words she thought she would never say again. "Then we move." Together they stepped into the wilds, leaving the broken city behind. But in the tunnels below, the conquerors shouted in fury. The hunt was far from over. The wild lands stretched out before them, wide and untamed. The air smelled of pine and wet earth. Broken ruins scattered the hills, reminders of a kingdom that once thrived but now lay in silence. Elias moved carefully, guiding the princess over uneven ground. Her steps were weak, and the heavy chains on her wrists slowed her down, but she did not complain. For the first time since her capture, she walked with her head lifted, even if only a little. They reached a patch of forest as the sun dipped low. Long shadows stretched across the ground, and the calls of strange birds echoed in the distance. Elias found a sheltered spot near a fallen tree and lowered his pack. "This will do for tonight," he said. The princess sat slowly on the soft grass, her body trembling from exhaustion. Her chains clinked softly as she folded her arms across her knees. Elias gathered branches, building a small fire that crackled gently in the cool air. For a time, neither spoke. The firelight danced on their faces, casting shadows that seemed alive. The silence was not empty, but heavy with unspoken thoughts. At last, the princess broke it. Her voice was quiet, filled with sorrow. "I was meant to be more than this. A leader, a protector of my people. Now I am nothing but a broken crown, carried by a stranger." Elias looked at her across the fire. His expression was calm, his eyes steady. "You're not broken, not while you can still speak, still breathe, still stand. That is strength, even if you don't feel it." She shook her head, her chains clinking softly. "My people saw me fall. They saw me dragged in chains. Their hope must be gone forever. What kind of leader can inspire after such shame?" Elias leaned forward, his hands warming by the fire. "A real leader is not one who never falls. A real leader is one who rises again, even after being brought low. They don't need perfection. They need hope. And you are still alive to give it to them." The princess lowered her eyes. His words touched something deep inside her, yet fear still held her heart. "Hope. It feels like a distant dream." Elias stirred the fire with a stick, watching the sparks rise into the night. "Dreams are where hope begins. And from dreams, change comes. I've seen it before. On my own world, when things seemed impossible, it was a single person who chose not to give up that made others believe again." The princess lifted her gaze, studying him in the glow of the fire. "And you think I can still be that person?" "I don't think," Elias said firmly. "I know." Silence followed again, but this time it was softer. The fire crackled, and the forest sang its quiet night song. The princess spoke once more, her voice almost a whisper. "When I was young, my father placed the crown upon my head during the Festival of Stars. He told me that one day I would lead, with wisdom and strength. Now that crown lies in ashes, and I have nothing." Elias reached into his pack, pulling out a strip of cloth. He leaned forward and carefully tied it around her wrists to ease the bite of the chains. His voice was steady, gentle. "The crown is only metal. What matters is the person who wore it. And you're still here." Her eyes shone faintly in the firelight. She had been called weak, humiliated before her people, stripped of her symbols. Yet this one human looked at her and saw not weakness, but worth. A strange warmth filled her chest. She turned her face slightly, hiding it from him. For the first time in many days, she felt a small flicker of something she had thought lost, belief in herself. The night deepened. Elias kept watch, while the princess rested. His eyes scanned the trees, ears alert for movement. The enemy would not give up the chase. He knew they would search every forest, every ruin, until she was found again. As the stars filled the sky, the princess stirred in her sleep. Her chains rattled softly as she shifted closer to the warmth of the fire. Elias glanced at her, his expression calm but firm. He had chosen his path the moment he stepped forward in the square. He would not leave her, no matter what came. By dawn, the fire had burned low. Mist drifted through the trees, cool and thick. Elias rose, stretching his sore muscles, and nudged the princess gently awake. "We need to move," he said. "They'll be searching already." The princess opened her eyes slowly. She looked weary but stronger than the day before. She stood with his help, adjusting the chains on her wrists. "Where do we go now?" Elias pointed toward the distant mountains, their peaks hidden by mist. "There are resistance groups there, people still fighting even after the fall. If we can reach them, you can give them hope again." Her heart tightened. The thought of standing before her people again, after everything, filled her with both fear and longing. Could she face them as she was? Could she still inspire them? Elias seemed to sense her doubt. He looked at her steadily. "They don't need a perfect queen. They need you, alive, standing, refusing to give in. That will be enough." The princess took a deep breath. The chains were still heavy, but they no longer felt like the end. For the first time since her capture, she felt the faint stirrings of purpose again. "Then we go to the mountains," she said. Elias gave a small nod. "Good. We move fast, and we don't stop until we find them." Together, they left the forest camp behind. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with danger, but also with the chance of something greater. As they walked, the princess glanced at Elias. His steps were steady, his eyes always searching the horizon. He carried no crown, no title, yet he bore himself with a strength she could not ignore. Perhaps, she thought, strength did not come from crowns or thrones. Perhaps it came from the refusal to surrender, even when all seemed lost. And as the mist cleared and the sun rose over the mountains, the broken crown she once carried in her heart no longer felt like a weight. Instead, it felt like a challenge. She would rise again. Not because she was unbroken, but because she had been broken, and still chose to stand. Elias glanced at her as they walked, and for a moment their eyes met. No words were spoken, but both understood. The road ahead would be hard, but together they would face it. The mountains loomed larger with each passing day. Jagged peaks tore through the clouds like the teeth of some sleeping beast, their slopes wrapped in forests and mist. The air grew colder as Elias and the princess climbed higher, their breaths forming clouds in the chill. For days, they had walked in silence, always moving, always listening for the sounds of pursuit. The enemy's patrols had not stopped hunting. Distant horns sometimes echoed through the valleys, reminding them that the conquerors were never far behind. The princess stumbled often, the weight of her chains pulling her down. Each time she faltered, Elias was there, steadying her, lifting her to her feet. He never complained, never slowed, even when exhaustion pulled at him. On the 5th day of their journey, they reached a narrow ridge overlooking a wide valley below. Smoke curled faintly in the distance, patrols searching. The princess leaned against a rock, her chest heaving. "They are close," she whispered. "We cannot outrun them forever." Elias scanned the valley. His jaw tightened. "Then we don't run forever. We fight when we must, and we keep moving when we can. That's survival." The princess lowered her eyes. "But if they catch us?" "I will not let you die because of me." Elias turned sharply, his voice firm. "You're not a burden. Don't ever say that. If I fall fighting. But I will never leave you." Her eyes widened slightly at the strength in his tone. She opened her mouth to argue, but his gaze silenced her. He meant every word. That night, they camped in a small cave near the ridge. The firelight flickered across the stone walls, painting them with dancing shadows. The princess sat close to the flames, her chains glowing faintly in the heat. She stared into the fire, her face troubled. Elias sat across from her, sharpening a piece of stone into a crude blade. His hands were steady, his focus clear. Finally, the princess spoke. "You should leave me, Elias. Go on without me. Alone you could move faster, you could escape. The resistance would welcome you for your courage." Elias looked up, his expression unreadable. "And leave you here to die?" Her voice shook. "If it saves you, yes. My life has already been broken. But yours still has meaning." Elias set the stone blade aside and leaned forward. His voice was calm but unyielding. "You think your life has no meaning? Then you don't see what I see. You are more than chains, more than defeat. Your people still need you, even if they don't know it yet. And I—" He paused, choosing his words. "I will not walk away while you still breathe." The princess's eyes burned with tears, though she tried to hide them. She turned her head, staring at the fire. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Not her generals, not even her own family. Later, as she lay against the cave wall, pretending to sleep, she heard Elias moving, quietly checking the entrance, placing stones to block the wind. His every action spoke the same truth. He would not abandon her. By dawn, they were moving again, climbing higher into the mountains. The path grew narrow, forcing them to walk close together. Mist swirled around them, hiding the cliffs below. Suddenly, the sound of horns echoed again, closer this time. From the trees behind them, figures emerged. "Soldiers in dark armor, weapons ready." "They've found us," Elias muttered. The princess froze, fear gripping her chest. There were too many, at least a dozen. Elias looked at her quickly. "Go. Up the path. Don't stop." Her eyes widened. "What about you?" "I'll hold them," Elias said firmly, raising the crude blade in one hand and a broken branch in the other. The princess shook her head violently. "No, you'll be killed." Elias's voice was like iron. "Better me than you. They want you alive. If you fall into their hands again, all of this will be for nothing." The soldiers advanced, their footsteps shaking the ground. The princess's heart pounded. She could not let him stand alone. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling but fierce. "I will not leave you." Elias turned his head, surprised. She stepped forward, her chains heavy, but her eyes bright with a fire he had not seen before. "You saved me when no one else would. You carried me when I could not walk. You gave me hope when I had none. And now you ask me to leave you? I refuse." Soldiers drew nearer, their weapons gleaming in the mist. Elias stared at her, a mixture of pride and frustration in his eyes. He wanted to argue, but the resolve in her gaze was unshakable. "Then we fight together," he said at last. The soldiers rushed forward. Elias moved first, striking with speed and precision. He knocked one soldier aside, dodged another, his crude blade flashing in the mist. The princess, though weak, swung her chains like a weapon, striking a soldier's arm and knocking his spear aside. For a moment, the impossible happened. A human and a broken princess stood back to back, holding off trained warriors with nothing but will and desperation. The fight was brutal, the clash of steel and shouts filling the mountain air. Elias fought with every ounce of strength, his body moving like a shield around the princess. She, too, fought with all she had, her spirit rising higher with each strike. At last, Elias grabbed her hand. "Now! Run!" They broke through a gap in the line and fled up the mountain path. Arrows whistled past, clattering against stone, but none struck true. Their breath burned in their chests as they climbed higher, never looking back. Hours later, when the shouts had faded into the distance, they collapsed against a rock outcrop. The princess's body shook with exhaustion, but her eyes were bright. You did not leave me," she whispered. Elias, still breathing hard, gave a small, tired smile. "And you did not leave me. That makes us even." For the first time, the princess laughed, a soft, broken sound but filled with life. It startled her as much as him. Elias leaned back, staring at the sky. "You're stronger than you think. Stronger than the chains. Stronger than the fear. Remember that." The princess looked at him for a long time, her heart steady. In her chest, the broken crown no longer felt like ashes. It felt like something waiting to rise again. She touched the cold iron on her wrists and whispered, "Then together, we will rise." Elias nodded, his gaze never wavering. Together. The mountains stretched before them, vast and full of danger, but now neither felt alone. The mountains seemed endless, but for the first time since their escape, the princess no longer felt only fear in her heart. Beside her, Elias walked with steady steps, his eyes always searching the horizon for danger. His presence was a wall of strength, and his words still echoed in her thoughts. Together. The days grew colder as they climbed higher, the air thinner and the winds sharper. At night, they huddled near small fires, speaking little but understanding much. Slowly, the silence between them shifted. Not the silence of strangers, but the quiet bond of companions who trusted each other with their lives. One morning, after a long climb through jagged paths, Elias stopped and pointed ahead. "Look!" The princess lifted her eyes. Beyond the mist, far in the distance, she saw faint lights glimmering against the mountainside. They were not enemy fires. These lights were too hidden, too scattered. "The resistance," Elias said. Hope stirred in her chest. She had heard whispers of those who still fought in secret, survivors who refused to kneel. To see signs of them now, it felt like a dream. But reaching them would not be simple. The enemy still hunted, and the princess was weak from her long ordeal. Her steps faltered as they pressed forward, and Elias often caught her arm before she stumbled. Still, she refused to stop. At dusk, they found themselves above a narrow valley. Smoke rose from hidden fires below. Elias studied the scene with sharp eyes. "We must go down carefully. If they are truly allies, they will welcome us. If not," he left the thought unfinished. The princess's heart pounded. She knew the resistance had suffered greatly. Many of her people had turned against one another out of fear. Would they even trust her now, after all she had lost? Together, they descended the slope. As they neared the valley floor, shadows moved among the rocks. Figures emerged, weapons raised. "Stop!" a voice commanded. Elias raised his hands, stepping in front of the princess like a shield. "We come in peace," he called out. "We seek the resistance." The figures stepped closer. In the firelight, the princess saw them clearly. Men and women of her people, hardened by war, their faces lean but their eyes fierce. One of them gasped, "Princess?" The words spread like a spark. Murmurs rose among the group. Some stared with awe, others with doubt. An older man stepped forward, his hair streaked with gray. His eyes searched the princess's face, then her chains. "It cannot be." His voice shook. "We thought you were dead." The princess's throat tightened. She struggled to find her voice. "I was taken, broken, but I am alive because of him." She turned toward Elias, who stood silently at her side. "A human saved me when no one else dared." The resistance fighters exchanged uneasy glances. A human among them was a strange sight. Some frowned with suspicion, others with quiet respect. Elias said nothing. He let the princess speak. The older man bowed his head. "If you live, princess, then hope lives too. Come, you are safe here." For the first time in many months, the princess stepped into a place where she was not hunted, not scorned, not broken. The camp welcomed her with cautious warmth. They gave her food, warmth, and clean water. Elias, though not one of them, was offered the same. That night, as the fires burned bright, the resistance gathered around to hear her speak. Their eyes were filled with questions, with doubt, with desperate hope. The princess stood slowly, her chains still heavy on her wrists, her voice trembling at first. "I am not the same as I once was," she admitted. "I was captured. I was made to believe I was nothing. But I live. And I stand before you now, not because I am strong, but because one human refused to let me die." She glanced at Elias, who met her gaze with quiet steadiness. Her voice grew stronger. "If he, an outsider, could believe in me when I did not believe in myself, then how can we, the people of this land, not believe in each other? The enemy thinks we are broken. They think our spirit is gone. But I say they are wrong. We are still here. We are still fighting." A murmur rose among the crowd, faces lit with cautious fire. The old man's eyes gleamed with tears. The princess lifted her chained hands high. "These chains do not mark the end. They mark the beginning of our return. With human courage beside us and our own hearts unyielding, we can rise again." The camp erupted in cheers. Some shouted her name. Others clapped Elias on the back, their doubt turning into respect. The spark of rebellion, long buried, burned bright again. Later, as the camp quieted, the princess sat near the fire. Elias joined her, lowering himself onto the stone beside her. "You spoke well," he said simply. She gave him a faint smile. "I only spoke what you gave me, the truth that I am not alone." For a moment, silence stretched between them, filled only by the crackle of flames. Then Elias leaned forward. "This is only the beginning. The enemy is strong, but so are we. Together we can fight." The princess nodded, her eyes steady. "Yes, together." Above them, the stars shone bright against the dark sky. The mountains, that once felt like a prison, now seemed like guardians, sheltering the spark of rebellion. The princess lifted her gaze, and for the first time in a long while, she believed not only in her people, but in herself. She was no longer the broken crown. She was a flame waiting to rise, and she would rise not alone, but with the human who refused to leave her side. And so, in the hidden valley of the mountains, a new chapter began. The resistance found its voice again. The princess found her strength again, and humanity proved once more that even in the darkest of places, a single act of courage could light the fire of hope for all.